Are Haas and Ferrari cheating? Haas couldn't buy a point for all the money in Mazepin's pocket in 2021, and suddenly they're quicker than most of the Mercedes-powered cars put together and have flown into 2022 on the back of the magnificent Magnussen's pace as potential podium chasers. All of that after sacking their moneybags pay driver? How? Why? What? The question asked is, are Haas getting more than what the rules allow from their deal with engine supplier Ferrari? Or did the Haas technicians get the newly changed 2022 rules bang on with the design of the car? Well, firstly, the new Haas pace was foretold by Gunther Steiner, who's apparently a prophet in 2021. When I see the progress we're making in the development, it's promising, but it keeps me humble that I have nothing to compare with. Hopefully we can be midfield, but where in the midfield I have no idea, said Steiner last year when talking about the car for the new rules. Now, how could this be with the donkey they called the car in 2021 being that bad? Now that's just it. Haas spent diddly squat on developing the car in 2021. From day one, they said they were seeing last season as a transitional year, instead focusing on developing the car for 2022. So effectively they spent all of last year working on this year's car. And if you remember pre-COVID, there were a few Haas F1 cars that were pretty decent. So when they're focused and financed, Gunther's boys do have a record of producing decent cars, even if memory serves, scoring points in their very first race. Haas also enlarged their technical team recently, adding a technical director for the first time when working on the 2022 car. Interestingly though, making things more difficult, Simone Resta is a former Ferrari and Alfa Romeo employee. What support do Haas actually get from Ferrari? Well, according to the rules, components teams must develop, manufacture and own the intellectual property for themselves are the survival cell and primary roll structure, the front impact structure, aerodynamic components, the wheel drum and drum deflectors and the wheel covers, the fuel bladder and primary heat exchangers. So what does Ferrari sell Haas? Well, obviously the power unit and gearbox, and much of the rest of the car actually, excluding the above mentioned components. Haas cannot hide their strong Ferrari ties either, as they make use of the Ferrari Academy driver Mick Schumacher. So no aero components then? Now this is one of the things that has led to skepticism from other teams, because how do you not share aero components when Haas share Ferrari's wind tunnel and even have an office at Maranello from which they manage their 460 hours they get in the wind tunnel this year, because of finishing last in last season's standings. What exactly are Ferrari supplying Haas to has led to unrest among mostly the Mercedes-powered teams, who seem somewhat off the current pace shown by the Ferrari and Honda teams. With Haas openly snatching up as many Ferrari parts and former staff as possible, this has led to more questions from competitors. Toto Wolff saying, but going forward, if we were to need to compromise our, let's say, income ability, we need to do this because none of the teams should be able to cooperate in a way that we're seeing today with some of the teams. McLaren's Andreas Seidel said, it's clear for us that Formula 1 should be a championship of 10 constructors or 11 or 12, which means there should be no transfer happening of any intellectual property which is related to core performance. The maximum that should be allowed to share is the power units and the gearbox internals. That's it. There should be no sharing of any infrastructure, or so on. As soon as you allow that, intellectual property transfer is happening on the car side, and we know also from the FIA it's difficult to police, and if something is not possible to police, you need to ban it. 3 teams have reportedly asked the FIA to have a look at the Ferrari-Haas relationship due to the amount of former Ferrari staff now employed at Haas, who is already mentioned to have an office close to Ferrari at Maranello and use the wind tunnel and buy their engines, gearboxes, etc. Obviously former Ferrari guys and gals bring knowledge with them. You can't exactly use that little white torchy thingy from the Men in Black movies to wipe their memories clean when they leave Ferrari. And that leads to what Seidel and effectively Wolff has a problem with, transfer of technical data. In response though to Wolff and Seidel etc., Gunther Steiner said, there are sometimes things in the rules that if they don't work for you, you cannot go and change it. Mercedes was winning the World Championship 8 years in a row. They had a very strong engine and good for them, they did a good job. But nobody said, oh, we now need to change the engine rule because Mercedes is winning everything. There is governance in place, and if certain people think they can change everything by just speaking, I don't think that's going to happen. Concerning the 2022 Haas VF22, our technical director Simone Resta said, "In terms of creating a new car, it's probably the most complex in the last 20 years. I've been really participating a lot of launches in different positions, and I must confess, I can't remember such a big change in the last 20 years or so." Which leads to the same question again. Did Haas do it themselves, as they did when they started in F1, or did they have, let's say, grey area assistance from the prancing horse? My opinion? Well, whether it was on purpose or not, as Andreas Seidel said, the fact that they have so many former Ferrari staff that still have friends, possibly family, still at Ferrari and use the Ferrari wind tunnel and engine and gearbox, that means that some transfer of technical data had to have taken place. It's just impossible that it didn't. There is also no way to prevent it from happening. What needs to be prevented is blatant illegal assistance from one team using another to test theories or run interference during a season. And that can only be stopped by the FIA, and possibly by stopping the use of infrastructure, the share of infrastructure. If I remember correctly, Aston Martin also used Mercedes wind tunnel a few years ago. But the same thing should go for every team. What advantage does AlphaTauri get from Red Bull? How well is that policed? Is it policed at all, or are they allowed to share everything because they have the same owner? What advantage did Aston Martin or Racing Point then get from Mercedes a few years ago when they just blatantly copied their car? Short-term advantage anyway, because Aston Martin have been paying the long-term price for that experiment, haven't they? As Seidel said, if it can't be policed, it needs to be banned. And yes, I agree. You can't have a share of infrastructure and a share of staff without a share of knowledge. And that, according to the FIA rules, is illegal. So if Ferrari can't share with Haas and Alfa Romeo, then Red Bull should also not be allowed to share with AlphaTauri. And it also needs closer scrutiny. Teams should not, in my opinion, be allowed to have B teams in the same formula. And what's good for the goose should be good for the gander. Well, that's my unpopular opinion in any way. God bless, and have a think about subscribing. I've heard it increases your chance of living to the age of 95 and of your team winning the championship. But then again, don't believe everything you hear. God bless.